But let's say a very good morning to William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party. William, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Morning, Mike.
Morning. Sorry to bring you the bad news that junior doctors still aren't happy and they're going to have yet another strike from Friday, August the 11th to Tuesday, August the 15th. So whatever you do, don't fall ill during that particular period or they won't help you.
Yeah, I've commented on this before. What the junior doctors are trying to do, they're making a mistake of trying to correct the 15-year lag in their salary and conditions overnight, and they're trying to do this in a cost of living crisis and the situation where the government can't balance its books, so it's not tenable, and I would urge them to be more realistic.
Yes, I think being more realistic would be a big help for them. And also, why do they always have to strike at the weekends? It's always Fridays and Thursdays they start the strike. The last one started on Thursday and went for 5 days. This one starts on Friday and goes for 4 days. But, I mean, I'm sure they'll all be having a lovely time somewhere on the Costa del Sol.
Yeah, that may be just a coincidence that it happens on a weekend, Mike. I'm not really sure, but certainly, I mean, in principle, it does make sense if you're going to strike. The purpose of a strike is to inconvenience the public, isn't it, and to exercise
well, yeah, I mean, the purpose of a strike is to inconvenience the public if you're a train driver, but not if you're a doctor, for God's sake. Why would you want to inconvenience people who are sick?
Well, that's what's happening. I mean, that as I say, I mean, I've said it before, they put in you cannot correct a chronic, long-term degradation in your wages overnight. It's just ridiculous. You cannot do that. What you can do is negotiate an increase this year and next year and slowly try and claw it back. They're not being realistic. They should look at what the nurses have done. And the nurses started off at asking for 20% and they've settled for far less. So I think they should be realistic and get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk about the biggest story that the banking sector has seen, I think, since the almost collapse of NatWest back in 2008. This is quite an extraordinary story. I can't quite believe how wrong NatWest have got this. Every single step of the way, they've got it wrong, haven't they?
Well, they've certainly got the comms, in inverted commas, wrong, and they've certainly made grave errors by leaking or talking about client information to external actors. That's a mistake, but I would just go further back than that. I think it's utterly reprehensible for banks to be debanking people because of their political beliefs. And further, I think it's utterly reprehensible for so many commentators to wade in and basically back the bank against Nigel Farage and others, again, nakedly, because they just disagree with his politics. We can't live in a society where people are debanked and you've got woke capitalists going through people's records and going through people's social media profiles to find out what they believe, to ask them, find out whether they want to provide services for them. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, I think woke capitalism is one of the most ridiculous things that has emerged over the last sort of 5 and 10 years. And the problem is, Mike, as soon as an eye is cast over the organizations themselves, it falls apart, all of this stuff. So it doesn't surprise me at all. I tweeted last night, that Alison Rose's position was utterly untenable, bye-bye, and then a few hours later, of course, she goes. And it's interesting, isn't it, Mike, that the dreaded, confirmation that the chairman backs you is a bit like the football manager's chairman backing the manager, and about 5 hours later she goes.
Yeah, except that in the difference, I suppose, between that and football is that usually in football, you say we've got you've got the full backing of the owners and all the rest of it, and then normally there's another loss or something, or they lose the next game, and then he's gone. But in this case, I was absolutely aghast yesterday when I saw NatWest Statement that she had admitted being the person who leaked the story to Simon Jack, the BBC business correspondent. The fact that they then said, when they were asked by the BBC if this story was good to go, and they said yes, it was. And the fact that they then said they still had confidence in her, despite the fact that not only has she breached the confidentiality of a client, but potentially she may have broken the actual law.
How can you have confidence in someone that's breached confidentiality of a client? It's just it's completely ridiculous.
Well, it's fundamental. Surely it's fundamental to the running of a bank, which is that you don't go around telling people secrets about other people's bank accounts.
Totally, that's a major mistake, and I think the FCA should have a look at that. Actually, certainly in theory, political belief is protected under the Act. So I think there are so many errors here, and the problem is, go back to the source. We know what the source is, Mike. The source is that we've got institutional capture. It's not just the banks, it's the Church of England, it's local authorities, it's government, all sorts of agencies all over the place have forgotten what their core role is. The core role of a bank is to provide you with banking services. It's not to go swooping and snooping into people's political beliefs like the Stasi. It's like East Germany. And it's got to stop. And as I say, I've been disappointed by this story. It was the reaction of so many others, actually, that weighed it in. I have disagreements with Nigel Farage on one or two matters, but I think it was utterly reprehensible for someone to be debanked because of their political opinions. And by the way,
but that's also the part that's illegal, because apparently there is an EU law, which maybe not those of us who don't know that minutiae of EU law don't know about, but apparently it is illegal to debank somebody because you don't like their politics.
Well, it's illegal under UK law because it breaches the Equality Act, Mike, because the Equality Act protects personal beliefs. So, the whole thing is ridiculous. And always, we've got to remind ourselves that NatWest is owned partly by us, 39%. We bailed this bank out in the banking crisis in 2008. We own 39% of it. And I would say, since on Brexit, the majority mainstream position in this country was to leave the EU. It seems ridiculous for a bank that was supported by that public to go around rooting around people's political opinions and cancelling them. And Coutts, this is the ridiculous thing. This is what, at the heart of this, the basic problem with this, Mike, is woke capitalism is inherently dishonest, basically. Coutts is an exclusive bank, a very, very exclusive bank, and it's pretending that it's inclusive, and it ain't inclusive.
No.
And the ridiculous Coutts reputational risk committee has basically trashed its reputation.
Yes, and that was a reputational committee set up entirely and utterly by Dame Alison Rose. It was her committee. And when she said originally, and what I'm mostly perturbed about is the conduct of NatWest throughout this whole investigation, because first of all, they leak a story to the BBC which turns out not to be true. They pretend basically that she had nothing to do with the decision, which is clearly wrong. They pretended as well that she had nothing to do with the committee and that the views of the committee were nothing to do with her, also wrong. They then reveal that basically, there has been somebody who has said something to someone, but she puts out a statement apologising to Nigel Farage without mentioning that she's the source. A week later, she then admits to being the source. I mean, the whole thing stinks of complete and utter incompetence and diversionary tactics.
That's just normal incompetence. But what I'm really concerned about, for the public's sake, is what is underneath this. What's underneath it? And you only need to look at the various MEPs and other people that were debanked and their families that were debanked because banks didn't like what they were saying. Underneath this, there are probably tens of thousands of people who've had their bank accounts arbitrarily removed. And remember, I mean, again, I have differences with Reform UK and Reclaim, but you speak to those parties, they were political parties that found it very, very difficult to get bank accounts.
Yeah.
That is a ridiculous situation in a democracy. And I think the FCA should look at it. And if necessary, I mean, I know the government acted reasonably quickly, but the Tories, it's on their watch, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And what they tend to do is react when things go wrong. It'd be nice if they put laws in place to stop this happening in the first place.
Well, they're supposed to be putting laws in place, but I'm not sure that they ever will, because at the end of the day, the government says they're going to do an awful lot of things, which they end up not actually doing. But the question a lot of people are asking me is how much of a payoff will she get? Will she receive some kind of remuneration as a compensation for being fired? I mean, I personally don't think she should, and I think we should have a say in that, given that we own a third of the bank.
Well, it's our money, Mike.
Yeah.
It's our money. And I think this is another scandal that's gone on for years. The remuneration committees, the REMCOMs have upped the salaries of these executives for years and years and years, and you end up earning millions and millions of pounds a year for not doing a very good job, which isn't right. But that's at the heart of it, Mike. This is the whole point. You ask yourself why woke is so popular among, diversity inclusion initiatives are so popular among these large organizations. And I'll tell you why, Mike. It's because it's a very good way of distracting attention away from inequality and, these massive pay rises they get. And let's talk about rainbow flags and rainbow laces this week, and just hopefully you'll ignore the fact that I'm paid £5 million and I don't do a very good job.
But shouldn't this then be a wake-up call to the woke, if you will, on the basis that, you know, you can't hide behind, you know, diversity and inclusion. You can't hide behind rainbow flags and gender-neutral toilets. If you don't do your job, you shouldn't be allowed to do it. And they need to get people in. This woman was hired, having only ever worked at NatWest. She's only ever had one job in her life. She went to NatWest when she was in her early 20s after university, and she's never been anywhere else, right? She was appointed, I think in 2019 or 2018, in order to salvage the reputation of the bank, to make it more diverse, to make it more inclusive, to make it less sexist. Nothing to do with banking, everything to do with wokery.
Yeah, I mean, this is everywhere, Mike. I mean, it literally is everywhere. Everything is about comms and everything's about posturing. And so many organisations have forgotten what their core function is. I mean, actually, you know, I follow there's a very large, I won't name it, but there's a very large corporation, a global corporation, which I follow. And if you look at their annual reports, there's a section in it which says political and charitable contributions, nil. And it says nil every single year, and it's a very successful company, and they just carry on doing what they do, and they don't need to get into any of this.
Right.
I think we should get back to a situation where core functions in government and in these other organisations are the prime order.
Absolutely right. More bad news for Alison Rose, even as we speak. She's apparently immediately going to step down from 2 major Downing Street roles. And this again tells you more about the way that the wokists kind of inveigle their way into every single aspect of our lives. The now former CEO of NatWest apparently was a top advisor to the Energy Efficiency Task Force, which is in the Net Zero department, believe it or not. And she was also a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. Well, thank God. Well, thank God she's no longer doing those 2 roles either. She's stepping down from both of those. Quite right too. More from William Clouston and myself coming next on TalkTV.